someone vanish from the safest place they know? A 4-year-old boy. A quiet evening on a family farm in the South Australian Outback. And then, nothing. No sound, no struggle, no trace. Just the endless stretch of red earth and the kind of silence that swallows every answer before it's ever spoken. This is the case of Gus Lamont, a little boy who disappeared from his family's remote sheep station near Unpack, South Australia, on September 27, 2025. In a place so open, so wide, and so still, how does a child simply vanish? What began as a desperate search soon became one of the most confounding mysteries in modern Australian history, one that would test not only the limits of human endurance, but the boundaries of truth itself. And somewhere within that silence, there may still be a clue everyone missed. If you stand for truth and justice, like, share, and subscribe to Shadow Detective. Comment below where you're watching from, and what you think really happened to Gus Lamont. Because sometimes the answers hide in plain sight, waiting for someone who's still willing to look. The story begins far from the cities, far from the noise, in the vast, sunburned heart of South Australia's mid-north, about 40 kilometers south of the small town of Unpack, population barely over 100. Here, the land stretches endlessly, flat, silent, a palette of red dust and yellow grass, broken only by the distant hum of a windmill or the low cry of a crow drifting on dry wind. This is a place where distance defines everything, where neighbors are measured not in streets, but in kilometers, and where the line between solitude and isolation is paper thin. The Lamont family lived and worked on one of these sprawling sheep stations, a property passed through generations, self-sustaining and remote. The kind of place where children grow up learning the rhythm of the land, the crackle of heat, the stillness of dusk, the wide-open sky that feels both infinite and unforgiving. On this property, 4-year-old Gus Lamont was surrounded by people who loved him deeply. His parents, his grandmother, and relatives who all shared the same land, the same air, the same routine. Out here, everyone looks after their own. Every face is familiar, every path well known. It's a community built on trust and silence, the kind that binds families tightly and keeps stories even tighter. And yet, it was in this place, the heart of safety, the home that knew every footprint, that Gus Lamont would vanish into nothing. Because in the Outback, the land remembers everything, but it doesn't always tell. It was Saturday, September 27th, 2025. The day had been warm, the kind of dry spring heat that paints everything gold before the evening settles in. At around 5 p.m., Gus was outside the family's property near the homestead. His grandmother later told police she had seen him playing near a small mound of dirt, not far from the main house, a spot so close she could still hear the sound of the windmill turning behind him. Nothing about that moment felt unusual. No warning, no alarm, just a child playing in the fading light of the Outback. But when she called out to him a short while later, there was no answer. At first, it was confusion, a grandmother's instinct that maybe he'd wandered around the side of the shed or behind the water tank. But as the minutes passed, and every familiar corner of the property remained empty, that confusion turned to fear. By 5:30, the family had begun their own frantic search, voices echoing across the open paddock, calling his name into the wind. The sound carried far, but there was nothing to answer back. When night began to fall, they called South Australia Police. Within hours, local officers, neighbors, and volunteers converged on the property. Torches swept the ground, headlights cut through the dark. By dawn, the search had grown. Helicopters circled above, drones scanned from the air, dogs traced the dry soil for scent. But not a single clue, no footprints, no discarded clothing, not even the faintest track, showed where Gus might have gone. Authorities extended the radius, combing every gully, every fence line, every water hole. Days passed. Hope began to sink into disbelief. This wasn't a dense forest where someone could disappear among trees. This was open country, visible, vast, and bare. If a 4-year-old boy had simply wandered off, they should have seen something. But they didn't. And that absence, that impossible silence, became the very thing haunting every searcher, every parent, every person who heard the name Gus Lamont. Because in one of the largest and most exhaustive search efforts in South Australia's history, not a single trace was found. As the days turned into a week, The search for Gus Lamont transformed from an emergency into an investigation. More than 100 people had joined the effort. Police officers, volunteers, trackers, even members of the Australian Defence Force. Helicopters flew grid patterns over hundreds of square kilometers. Drones equipped with thermal imaging scanned for body heat through the night. Every creek bed, every hollow, every fence line was walked, marked, and cleared. Detectives later described it as one of the most intensive and methodical searches in South Australian history. And yet, there was nothing. No scent for the dogs to follow. No signs of struggle. No sign of Gus. Authorities began to shift their focus. What had started as a search for a missing child was now becoming a search for answers. Investigators reviewed timelines. They spoke to everyone on the property that day. Family members, workers, neighbors who might have driven past the station road. They checked phone records, fuel receipts, and movement logs. The more they examined, the less sense it made. The land gave them nothing. But human memory, that was different. Reports mention that tensions within the family were already running high. In the days before Gus disappeared, an argument between his father and his grandmother was said to have taken place, the kind that leaves an atmosphere heavy, words unspoken, but felt by everyone around. Police never confirmed any connection between that dispute and the disappearance, but it painted a picture of a family already under emotional strain, before the worst even began. By the 6th day, officers made a difficult announcement. The large-scale ground search was being scaled back. They would continue investigations, but survival, in those conditions, for that long, was no longer considered likely. For many, it was the moment hope finally broke. For others, it was the moment suspicion began to grow. And while the land stayed silent, the noise online exploded. Social media filled with unverified claims, some saying Gus had been found, others inventing stories of evidence or suspects. Police called them false. But once released into the digital world, those rumors took on a life of their own. In the vacuum left by silence, speculation thrives. And as investigators continued their work behind closed doors, the internet began building its own version of the truth. But the land wasn't the only thing hiding something. When a child vanishes without trace, 3 explanations usually rise to the surface: accident, nature, or human hands. Each was examined in the case of Gus Lamont, and each left investigators with more questions than answers. The first theory, accident. That somehow, Gus wandered off into the vast outback and succumbed to the elements. It's the explanation that makes the most sense on paper. A 4-year-old, curious and playful, exploring beyond sight for only a few minutes before losing direction. But the land around the Lamont property isn't dense bush. It's open, flat, and exposed. Searchers covered nearly every meter of it, some areas more than once. If he had simply walked away, they would have found something: a footprint, a sock, a piece of clothing, any sign of distress. Yet nothing. The terrain told no story. Authorities considered the possibility of hidden hazards, disused mine shafts, old water tanks, even buried fence pits, places where a small child could fall unseen. Ground-penetrating equipment was brought in. Still no evidence emerged. If it was an accident, why did the land keep its silence? The second theory, nature itself. Could an animal have been responsible? South Australia's outback is home to wild dogs, feral pigs, and the occasional predatory bird. But experts quietly dismissed this early on. There were no drag marks, no disturbed soil, no trace of struggle. Even scavengers leave patterns. Patterns investigators know how to read. Here there was none. If nature had taken him, there should have been something left behind. Instead, there was nothing at all. The third theory, human involvement. The one investigators never confirmed, but could never quite ignore. Criminologists observing the case noted a strange detail, that after such an exhaustive search, one of the largest in the state, the total absence of physical evidence might point to a human factor. Someone removing, concealing, or moving evidence before anyone realized a child was gone. Police statements remained careful. They said there was no proof of foul play, but they also said nothing was ruled out. Every family member, every visitor, every local passerby was considered. Background checks, interviews, and timelines were quietly revisited. If it wasn't an accident, who was protecting who? And if someone knew more, why had they stayed silent? Across online forums and late-night discussions, theories multiplied, some rooted in curiosity, others in anger, many in grief. But amid the noise, one truth remained constant: the official record still ended exactly where it began, on that dry patch of land near Uinta, sometime after 5 p.m., when Gus Lamont simply disappeared. Each theory explains something. None explain everything. Behind every mystery, there are people living through what the rest of the world only watches. For the Lamont family, the days after September 27th became a blur of searchlights, helicopters, and questions that had no answers. At first there was hope. Fragile, desperate, real. Then came exhaustion. And then something heavier. Silence. Authorities said the family cooperated fully. They remained on the property, working alongside police, fielding questions no parent or grandparent should ever have to answer. Each day, the same nightmare replayed. The open horizon, the same patch of dirt where everything changed, and the unbearable thought that the truth might never come. In the nearby towns, Uinta, Oloree, and beyond, strangers became searchers. Farmers left their own land to walk the ridges and creek beds. Truck drivers slowed along the dirt tracks, scanning the scrub in the dim light. Even after the official search was scaled back, some never stopped looking. But for the family, the weight of uncertainty was unlike anything else. Without answers, grief can't find a place to rest. And without proof, hope refuses to die, no matter how many times it's told to let go. At the center of it all was a mother still waiting for her son, a father living in the shadow of unanswered suspicion, and a grandmother reliving the last moment she saw Gus. A moment she would never forgive herself for. Every family touched by disappearance learns the same painful truth. Time doesn't heal what's unknown. It only stretches it wider. For them, life has split into two timelines. The one before Gus vanished, and the one that has never moved forward since. Police say the case remains open. Forensic reviews continue. Every new tip, no matter how small, is logged and investigated. But for those closest to Gus, the noise of speculation, the arguments online, and the relentless curiosity of strangers make the quiet even harder to bear. Because while the world debates what happened, one family wakes up every day to what didn't. And in the Lamont home, beneath the hum of the windmill and the rustle of dry grass, that absence still lives, as real and constant as the land itself. Even in the quietest homes, you can still hear the question, where is Gus? It's been weeks since that September evening. And yet for many, it still feels like the moment never ended. The helicopters are gone now. The searchlights no longer cut across the horizon. But the question still hangs over the red earth of Uinta like heat in the air. Where did 4-year-old Gus Lamont go? Officially, the case remains open. A long-term missing persons investigation under South Australia Police. Officers continue to follow leads, review statements, and reassess every square meter of the property where he was last seen. But even the most seasoned investigators admit, cases like this leave a mark. In the absence of evidence, every possibility feels alive. And in the absence of closure, every sound of the wind becomes a whisper of what could have been. The hidden clue, the one everyone missed, may not be a physical object at all. It may be buried in what was never said. In the half-hour gap between a child at play and the moment silence fell. In a family's unspoken grief. In the timeline that doesn't quite fit. Or maybe the hidden clue is the simplest one, that sometimes the land itself keeps its own secrets. What remains certain is this: a boy is still missing, and a family still waits. If you have any information about the disappearance of Augustus Gus Lamont, contact South Australia Police or Crime Stoppers Australia. Even the smallest detail, one memory, one sighting, one overlooked thought, could be the difference between silence and truth. Because every story like this deserves an ending. Every child deserves to be found. And every unanswered question deserves a voice that refuses to fade. If you believe in truth, compassion, and justice, share this video and help keep Gus Lamont's name alive. Your voice might reach the one person who knows what really happened. Because sometimes the smallest voices need the loudest echo.